travel isn't around, any sort of a business. It's not around influencing anybody. It's not about social media. It's not about taking pictures. It's really just doing what we want to do and what is within reach. Catching some kind of foodborne virus bacteria in the Philippines. And my wife and I were hospitalized for like a week in the Philippines.
Wow.
That was the worst. And no matter what you do, taking medicine, vaccinations, stuff happens, right? When I was in Pakistan, and this was before I was married, I had this silly idea to travel and see a lot of cultural heritage sites around the world. And Pakistan, I visited Mohenjo-daro and the necropolis of Makli and Lahore and a lot of places. But I came into Karachi, which is the capital of Pakistan. And the furthest that you could go on Cathay Pacific was Karachi. So I thought, let's start there and come back. And this was probably in the early 2000s at least, maybe even earlier. And,
there was still a lot of trouble in the country.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually after September 11th in the States, but there was still a lot going on. So probably not the best travel destination to choose. Staying with a bunch of students, and I was walking outside one day, and I was accosted by some police, and they basically said that they wanted to see my passport, that I shouldn't be there, that they were going to arrest me, all this jazz, and I've probably forgotten the details. It turns out when I was talking to the fellow that I'd originally met there, that the guy that was staying with them and the police were trying to get some money from me, and they were talking to each other, and they were just trying to extort some money from me.
Jason, welcome to what I call the chat room.
Thanks for inviting me.
Just now, you told me that you didn't like the weather. Kind of surprising. Is it too cold?
It's in between.
I'm saying this because I thought maybe the Spanish winter would feel like summer for a Canadian, right?
Yeah, no, it's a lot of misconceptions about Canada, right? I mean, we're originally from the West Coast, which is on the coast with like California and Washington, Seattle, and it's kind of warmed by the water. The weather's changed a lot around the world. When I grew up, it was very rare to get snow on the West Coast. Maybe once every 4 years. But now we're seeing a lot more forest fires in the summer.
Wow.
And we're even seeing snow every year. So, like, for me right now, this kind of overcast gray weather would be pretty normal. Or a little bit warmer or a little bit colder.
You've been traveling for 20 years.
Yeah.
How did it come about?
I was thinking about that. So I was looking at my notes here because I'm getting old. Probably more than 20 years, probably like 30 years. I think my first trip was, it was after high school. How did it come about? When I grew up, I grew up in a neighborhood and I was quite fortunate, basically middle class in Canada. It's quite a diverse neighborhood, a lot of different cultures. Canada at that time, I think, was also quite open to the world, quite involved internationally. So, I mean, I think there was a big kind of international influence growing up. Obviously not a massively cosmopolitan place like, a Paris or something or Barcelona, but still quite cosmopolitan and international considering the size. I grew up in probably a smallish medium place called Victoria, British Columbia.
Yeah,
which is
I
off
know.
the coast of Vancouver. And so, and even education was fairly international. So, and I'm fortunate that my parents had done a bit of traveling, not a lot, right? So I think I'm thankful for them for instilling some of that in me. Reading media, thinking of all these places,
Right.
that you could go. So, yeah. And then obviously being fortunate enough to have the opportunity.
Right. Did you have your first solo trip in high school?
I'm trying to think because I may have done some road trips before that.
Okay.
Like down to the States with friends. But yeah, that would be the first big.
Among others, was that solo trip to Turkey? How special was it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you don't realize the impact or how special things are until afterwards, right? I mean, it was actually a package tour because the reason that I chose Turkey is I was interested in the classics in Greek and Roman history.
Right.
and it's actually where I ended up going into university. And obviously, Turkey is the cradle of a lot of that, right?
Hmm.
So it was a package tour booked through a travel agency, a mall, right? Um, pre, not pre-internet, but pre a lot of the stuff that we have now. And I think that I saw that, and probably my parents saw that as a safe option for a solo trip, right? Traveling with a group. Um, and I'm not going to say that any way to travel is better than another, but it was probably pretty safe. It's kind of funny because it was actually, I think, one of these like gap year,
Hmm.
university, high school kid trips. So not so common in Canada, but I know in a lot of countries, kids take a trip before going to university.
Right.
So it was actually a lot of like under 30-year-olds, a lot of like Americans. And so being quite an introvert myself,
Hmm.
and being Canadian and not American, and actually on the younger edge of the kids on the trip. I think I probably missed out and didn't really see the whole point of the trip because I was really there to see the sights. So I don't think I probably had as much fun as a lot of other people did, but nevertheless, it was an amazing trip.
But back in
And
the days, I guess you were not on your phone because today, this is what happens with many people who don't
exactly.
leave
I
it.
mean, the crazy thing about that trip is the two things that I remember is is just the street touts in Istanbul and around, right?
Mm.
And as somebody from Canada, that made me really uncomfortable and not like the place at all. And again, I know it's a cultural thing. It's in lots of other cities, but
Yeah.
I try to avoid that now because although I understand the place and why it's there, you still like to comfortable, right? And funnily enough, the other thing, and this speaks to my age, is that I think I had a cassette recorder on the trip.
Oh, really?
And this is one of the things that I remember. And even at that time, a cassette recorder would have been a little bit old, right?
Hmm.
Like I had a CD, a Walkman as well, right? That played CDs. Even had a freaking mini disc player at one point. But I think the thing that I remember is that I had two cassettes that I listened to a lot on that trip, just because I was quite introverted, so I wasn't socializing so much. And one was like Yes, Close to the Edge, which is an old progressive rock band. And the other one was Los Lobos, which was like a band from California, kind of like X-Mex music. But I oddly enough remember that and sort of my comfort more than a lot of things about the trip.
How did you find the landscape in Turkey? It's a mixture of European and Oriental scenery.
Obviously, it was amazing, right? Like the Blue Mosque in Istanbul, Istanbul itself. I even have photographs, like print photographs that I haven't looked at in a long time. Cappadocia, right? The underground cities in Cappadocia. I remember Ankara. I remember the Mediterranean. But it's all just kind of like highlights, right?
You studied then traveling as a couple. So tell me a little bit about the challenges of this. Things like balancing interests,
Yeah.
favorite destinations.
Yeah, I don't think we think about it that much. I think that in general, again, we're fortunate enough to travel, so our travel isn't around any sort of a business. It's not around influencing anybody. It's not about social media. It's not about taking pictures. It's really just doing what we want to do and what is within reach, right? So one of the things, and we both love food, right? So that's a big thing. We both come from very different backgrounds. I mean, I was fortunate enough to travel at a fairly early age. My wife is from the Philippines. She didn't get the opportunity to travel a lot, right? So everything is cool and new to us, and so we don't really seek out anything in particular. Um, one of the best destinations that we have a lot of good memories of is St. Louis in Missouri. And that was really came about, well, there was a fair sale there from where we were. And it was reasonable price. The food is out of this world. The people are fantastic. So it's like really nothing exotic. And I would also say that it's changed even more now that we have our son who's 10, because really he's kind of dictating where we go. Um, Again, it's not about us, it's about him. So, he's interested in the military, he's interested in tanks. Let's go to the Tank Museum in England, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, every place has something to offer.
Right.
Yeah.
Is this when you've done most of your trips as a couple?
Yeah, I'd say so. You
Okay.
know, um, we had our son fairly late, so we spent a lot of time traveling, probably wasting money. If you know the real estate market everywhere, I mean, probably should have um, spent it on property.
Mhm.
But I did a fair amount of traveling prior to that, and so yeah, quite a lot.
You talked about wasting money, and that makes a perfect transition
Yeah.
to what I will call the travel tips. So, tell me a little bit about the importance of budgeting in short term and long term trips, planning as in general. I don't know how far you've been, maybe to other continents, then the health aspects as well.
Yeah, yeah. Fortunate enough that we've done a lot of our traveling when health wasn't really a concern.
Okay.
Um, Gosh, I'm trying to think of our worst health experience was probably catching some kind of foodborne virus bacteria in the Philippines, and my wife and I were hospitalized for like a week in the Philippines.
Wow.
That was the worst. And no matter what you do, taking medicine, vaccinations, stuff happens, right? And we're really fortunate that that was before we had our son and that he didn't fall ill, right? Budgeting, travel is so important. Like I don't ever regret doing it. Um, Definitely been to lots of exotic places, I guess. Been to lots of far flung places, whatever. Um, and we do like to travel in reasonable comfort. Um, but obviously, the challenge is from Canada. I find that a lot of Canadians probably don't have a lot of expendable income to
Right.
travel, unlike some other places, or even a lot of time. And a lot of Canada, it's a big country, is quite remote, right?
Hmm.
So it's a challenge, but it's a decision, and especially for our son, I think.
Are you reminiscent of any challenging experience, I will call it so, in one of your destinations?
Yeah, I mean, everything brings challenges, and I mean, I think my wife would remind me. I mean, I think that probably getting a shorter temper as I get older and less patient. But when you look back and you realize that they wasn't really a big deal, wasn't really a challenge, right? You got through it, um, and also having people to rely on, right? I mean, being in the Philippines when we got sick, I mean, having people that could take care of us and that you could trust was definitely a big thing. Probably my most extreme challenge, I guess, and you know, not having the context or being from the culture, you really don't know how serious it was when I was in Pakistan, and this was before I was married. I had this silly idea to travel and see a lot of cultural heritage sites around the world. And Pakistan, I visited Mohenjo-daro and the necropolis of Makli and Lahore and a lot of places. But I came into Karachi, which is the capital of Pakistan. Stupidly, I chose it because at the time, Cathay Pacific had a round the world fair.
Hmm.
And the furthest that you could go on Cathay Pacific was Karachi. So I thought, let's start there and come back. Um, and, yeah, travel's changed so much. But I landed in Karachi. There was this guy that I connected with on the internet through like some travel forum or something, because the internet was a lot more trusting, I feel, in the early days. And staying at his place with a couple of students in the defense district of Karachi. And this was probably in the early 2000s, at least, maybe even earlier. And,
There was still a lot of trouble in the country.
yeah, I mean, it was actually after September 11th in the States. Um, but there was still a lot going on. So
Yeah.
probably not the best travel destination to choose. Um, Staying with a bunch of students, and I was walking outside one day and I was accosted by some police. And they basically said that they wanted to see my passport, that I shouldn't be there, that they were going to arrest me, all this jazz. And I've probably forgotten the details. But they did let me go, and I went back and explained the experience to the guys that I was staying with. And one of them said, "Oh, yeah, that's a huge problem. You better give me your passport. I'll go clear it up, blah, blah, blah." And I was just scared, right? I was pretty young, right? And it turns out when I was talking to the fellow that I'd originally met there, that the guy that was staying with them and the police were trying to get some money from me, and they were talking to each other,
Mhm.
and they were just trying to extort some money from me.